A ver, ningún ser humano, a ese niño, cuando era niño, influyó su papá. Pero hoy día, después de eso, la sociedad influye. Y yo te decía, esos ricachones, esos grandes políticos, esos dueños del mundo, dueños de los países, dueños de las economías, van a aceptar que tú generes tu propia independencia, tu propia riqueza. A ver, ¿qué hace Estados Unidos contra aquellos países que pretenden desarrollarse, independizarse?
Bueno, hace poco liberaron los documentos de la CIA, están en internet, y ahí habla de cómo Estados Unidos se mete en todos lados, en todos lados. Las armas que tienen Osama Bin Laden y todo ese grupo, ese fue creado por los gringos.
Los narcos.
Las armas que tienen los narcos en México.
Ah, de allá, de los Walmart de allá, de
son financiados sí, prácticamente.
Es verdad. Eso es totalmente verdad.
¿Te das cuenta?
Pero,
entonces perdóname, su ego ha subido tanto que ya no va a tolerar que tú puedas progresar. Ellos van a tener el pie listo para ponérselo con la bota arriba de aquellos países, de aquellos pueblos que quieran independizarse, que quieran ser libres, que quieran salir adelante. Como le tienen el pie puesto a muchos, a varios, como le quieren, no le quieren poner el pie a China, que es la segunda potencia económica del mundo.
Sí, parece que iban a chocar con pared, ¿eh?
Es la primera, de hecho.
O sea, han chocado con pared no solo con China, con varios países, aunque
con Vietnam. Con Vietnam chocaron ahí. No pudieron con la guerrilla.
A ver, ¿qué le ha pasado incluso con Cuba? Con Cuba no han podido. No han podido someterla. No han podido dominar.
Pero hay mi duda. ¿Cómo está el pueblo cubano? Lo pregunto desde mi ignorancia. Yo no sé.
No. Mira.
O sea, ¿cómo vive la gente en Cuba?
La situación en Cuba, en lo que es el día a día, la vida económica para el pueblo, es compleja. Es difícil. Incluso pudiera decirte que, siendo bastante cercano a la realidad, es crítica. Cuba no es un país que tenga riquezas económicas. No tiene minas, no tiene petróleos, no tiene oro. Entonces,
tenía producción de algodón y de azúcar.
Tenía producción de algodón y de azúcar.
En la actualidad,
¿qué pasó con lo de la producción? En primera, lo de algodón, le regaron enfermedades. Las plantas de algodón, muy frágiles, rápidamente desaparecieron. Eso no duró nada, ni un año. Lo hicieron también con la caña de azúcar, pero ahí, como la caña de azúcar era más resistente, no lo lograron. Y te puedo decir que Cuba era el primer productor de azúcar de caña del mundo. ¿Qué hicieron para dañar la economía cubana? Devaluaron el azúcar, le bajaron los precios, a tal extremo que ya resultaba más costoso producir el azúcar que comprarla fuera. Y ahí el gobierno cubano, a mi punto de vista, en aquel momento se desesperó un poco y prácticamente, como consecuencia de todos los ataques, los frenos, las limitaciones que le imponía el bloqueo de Estados Unidos, prácticamente cometieron el error de casi abandonar la industria azucarera. Aunque tampoco niego que faltaban recursos para poder mantener una industria a nivel nacional. Para mantenerla hay que tener recursos. ¿Sí? ¿Y qué pasa? Cuba no ha tenido solvencia para comprar recursos. Ha tenido el apoyo de otros países.
Rusia un poco.
Rusia, no. Cuando existía el campo socialista tenía bastante apoyo. Y en esa etapa, desde mi punto de vista, creo que se cometieron muchos errores. Muchos. Porque no supimos, creo yo, administrar todos esos recursos. No supimos utilizarlos en función de un desarrollo industrial, en función de un desarrollo de condiciones materiales de vida, en función de un desarrollo de una base económica sostenible. Y pues los recursos que nos dieron los países socialistas se utilizaron, desde mi punto de vista, muy desordenadamente.
Because the fundamental question being put to us is, so the people of Cuba are suffering. The people of Cuba are going through a difficult economic time. I would argue that they've done so for 62 years. Why don't we get rid of the embargo? It would make life easier for them. And I want to address it. I want to address it especially to those that are not as familiar with this issue. First of all, let me begin by saying there are no American ships blockading Cuba, surrounding the island of Cuba. In fact, Cuba, frankly, does not have an embargo in the way people think. Cuba trades with the whole world. For example, Cuba every year exports $1.2 billion, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot for an island of 11 million people, okay? They export $461 million to China, $127 million to Spain, $65 million to the Netherlands, $64 million to Germany. This is not a country that's isolated. They trade with every country in the world. They export $5.3 billion a year. With Spain alone, they import, $1 billion from Spain. Another $790 million from China, $327 million from Italy, $285 million from Canada and from Russia. So they import over $5 billion, they export over $1.2 billion. Cuba is not isolated. They trade with every country. This regime trades with virtually every country on the planet. You know who else they trade with? The United States of America. Cuba trades with the United States of America. They import almost $280 million a year, almost as much as they do with Canada and Russia. And no one accuses Canada and Russia of having a blockade on Cuba. 66% of the chicken that's eaten in Cuba, which is the staple protein in Cuba, comes from the United States. Half their soybeans come from the United States. There is only one blockade in Cuba, and it is the blockade that this regime has imposed on its people. Now, yesterday, the president announced, or the White House announced, they're going to stand up some remittances group to try to figure out how do we make it easier for relatives to send money to their relatives on the island of Cuba. Well, that work group is going to not have a long time to meet. They're not going to have to meet for very long because U.S. law allows that now. It is not illegal to send money to your relatives in Cuba. The only thing that's prohibited is you can't send the money through this bank that the Cuban military set up in Panama. That's the only thing that's prohibited. And to the extent money can't reach the people of Cuba is because they refuse to allow anyone other than that bank to do these remittances. And by the way, they've prohibited depositing dollars. Here's how it works for them. You send your relative $100, they take 10% of it, then they take the dollars, they don't let them deposit it, they pocket the dollars, and they give them this worthless Cuban currency. So they have the dollars, so they can buy things for themselves and on the global market. So the blockade, to the extent that there's something that's preventing remittances directly to the Cuban people, it's not U.S. policy, it's regime policy. They're the ones that need a work group. What about medicine? That's another thing they put out there. This is so cruel. We don't allow medicine in. Do you know what the Cuban regime announced last week? This is what they announced on their national television. We are going to lift the ban on the importation of medicine. What? You mean there was a Cuban ban, a regime ban on importing medicine? Yes, there was. They're the ones that weren't allowing medicine in. And to the amount they were allowing it in, they were putting a tariff on it. So there's no blockade on medicine. We sell the medicine. And you can donate medicine, unlimited amounts under U.S. law. If there's a blockade on medicine, It's the regime's blockade. The other one I hear is the internet. I support the internet. Why don't we allow, I had somebody say this to me yesterday, why don't we allow American companies to go and provide internet? Then they would have internet. It's the embargo. And these people don't know what they're talking about. They literally are just parroting stupid, ridiculous talking points. Because the law on the U.S. and trade with Cuba specifically exempts telecoms. AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, every American telecom can go into Cuba tomorrow and offer phone and internet service. You know why they can't? Not our law. It's the Cuban regime, because they want to control that. And you see a pattern here. Blockade on travel, blockade on private ownership of business, blockade on bringing in medicine, blockade on bringing in money. Why? Because the Cuban regime wants to control people. They don't want an individual Cuban to have a paycheck that they earn for themselves. They want what little you have to come from them, because if you don't do what they tell you, they can take it from you. That's what they want. They don't want you to have internet companies offered by AT&T and Sprint and Verizon and anybody else, because they want to be able to shut it off when you're saying things they don't like and things against them. Same with medicine. They use all of these things as a tool. It's hard to fathom because we live here, but they use all of it as a tool. You want medicine? Are you posting stuff on the internet? Are you saying things against the regime? Are you speaking out? Are you not participating in these acts of repudiation that we force people to do? Because if you don't, you're not going to get your medicine. And they certainly don't want the cash flowing around. They don't want independent ownership. They don't want the people of Cuba to have liberty. This is all about control. All about control. And by the way, in the law that codified the embargo, it has a clause that automatically triggers the end of the embargo. And you want to know what this tough standard is that's in the law? Free the political prisoners, free press, free and fair elections, multi-party elections. The regime does those three things, the embargo ends automatically. Automatically. There is no embargo on Cuba. There is an embargo on the Cuban regime, an embargo on the companies they own. Because what they wanted to do is they wanted to take the Obama opening, funnel all that money through their companies. People say their Spanish companies own hotels. They don't own the hotels in Cuba. The regime owns the hotels. These hotel chains that open in Cuba on the beaches, they don't even pay their employees. They pay the Cuban government. The Cuban government pays the employees. Control. So the bottom line is this. Anybody who stands up and says there's an embargo, there's a blockade by the United States and it's cruel and it's causing all these policies is one of two things. They don't know what they're talking about and they're just parroting some talking point, or they're liars. That's the only two options. This is not about an embargo. The people of Cuba did not take to the streets, did not have their head cracked open, did not have their kids arrested and put in jail. Mothers who tomorrow plan to march in Cuba because they don't know where their children are. Arrested, they don't know where their kids are. They broke into homes, they grabbed 16-year-old boys, they gave them a bat, they said you're going halfway across the country to beat people up in the street. They didn't stand up against all those things because of an embargo or because they wanted remittances. They stood up because they wanted liberty. Libertad. That's what they wanted. That's what they're telling us. Why don't we listen to them? They told us what they want. They want libertad. They want liberty. And if there are any people on this earth that should understand that, it should be Americans.